I have a wish for negotiation. I have a wish to be allowed the opportunity to negotiate I have a wish for negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, I wish for conversation. I wish for different interpersonal relationships amongst people. I wish for basic respect. I wish that no was a full sentence. Whistle While You Work is a platform that has been made for dancers that discusses sexual harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power in dance and the performing arts.
Whistle While You Work is a platform meant to promote conversation about discrimination in its shortest form.
More or less, it's a collection of different sources of support for dancers. We have a testimony register online for people to share stories either anonymously or with their name. We can also keep stories if people would like to share them but not have them published online. We also have workshops that we offer, and we usually do them either at dance universities or at dance festivals. And yeah, we also make creative performances.
Whistle While You Work was born in 2017 when we just got tired of hearing stories from friends, basically, friends and colleagues about the microaggressions that they were experiencing that were clearly sexist at work. So we thought, hey, wouldn't this be great to expose this or to give these women and these people a chance to tell other people that this is happening in a public way. So we started the testimony website where you could just email a story and we would publish it. And you could be anonymous or not anonymous. And that's how it started. I was not afraid to start it. I was angry. It was mostly for me, it was anger that was driving it and a wish for change. But yes, there is an element of fear involved when you start talking about, should I attach my name to this? When I file a complaint or when I list a story, do I want to name names? And for me, yes, I sometimes want to, and I think it's important, but unfortunately, the legal system in most countries protects everyone else more than they protect the person who has a complaint. So I was advised not to attach any names to anything, and that was really discouraging. And to me, that exposes a larger systematic problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, especially in terms of talking about discrimination or abuse in the arts, the concept of economic fear is usually at like the center of why people don't come forward about things. Is of course, like, this is someone's job, like this is their work. And if the place where you do your work is the place that you're coming into contact with abuse, either physically, mentally, emotionally, something like this, then of course you still need to pay your rent at the end of the day. Like, you still need to have food. Like, there's like basic, of course, like economic concerns that people have. And if they're complaining about work, that might of course endanger the further ability to them or for them to work in the industry. And it's that kind of economic fear that we're of course always trying to work with the dancers who have come to us. How do they come forward in a way that just says, hey, I don't feel comfortable with this situation in the workplace, but I'm still a dedicated dancer, I still love dance, but these are situations that are absolutely inappropriate and we just need to change them for the betterment of the entire dance community. It's not about being a problem, it's just about asking for a different solution.
HR, human resources departments that a lot of companies have, not necessarily dance companies, there are plenty of dance companies that don't even have that, but HR departments are set up to protect the company rather than to protect the dancer. And that's something that is misunderstood. A lot of people are meant to believe that going to HR with a complaint will be good for the dancer or the employee, and that's incorrect. We are proponents of setting up a third-party complaint system so that a dancer could go somewhere that is a neutral ground or speak to someone who's on neutral ground about a complaint that they have at work. That way there's no conflict of interest or threat with their job. These things don't really exist in Germany so much.
Or also in the US.
Or also in the US. I'd say a lot of dancers first, before they consult with anyone, even a friend, is they'll say to themselves, is this really worth complaining about? Are my feelings actually real, or am I crazy? Is it in my head, or will other people agree with me? Or actually, you know what, it's just what everyone else goes through. It's just the way it is, the way it's always been, and maybe that's just the way it has to be, and it's the way it should be, and I should be stronger, and I should be able to withstand it, and if everyone sees me withstanding this abuse, then I'll actually be congratulated, and I will get a reward and being cast better, or getting, and it's true, it is rewarded. It's often rewarded, being able to withstand certain kinds of abuse in the studio.
Pervasive, sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, patriarchal, capitalist society, it is historically usually the easiest to oppress the people who have been oppressed throughout time. And women as a group of people have been historically oppressed, and I feel like we learn things even as children about how we look at women, how we talk to women, how we perceive their concepts of power. All of that is something that we learn from a structural-based society. So I feel like the way that we maybe are seeing the abuse of women now come forward is just because, of course, there's attention to it. And I feel like there is a lot of people actually being abused in these types of situations. I mean, something like misogyny, like this is also something that affects men. Men are also expected to have specific roles, and women suffer from those roles as well. And so I feel like, yes, it is very much seen as a gender-based discrimination, but it impacts every single interaction that happens in a society, and we live in a structurally problematic society. And so, yeah, you absolutely see an incredible amount of gender-based violence.
In terms of language, that's something that we're learning together as a society today, what certain terms mean, how to be respectful to each other. I feel like this is a relearning time where everyone is collectively trying to decide what's acceptable, what is disrespectful, what's unacceptable. And if we look to the dance studio, I want to speak to this idea that dancers themselves are more vulnerable to an abusive dynamic because they are trained to even be self-abusive. They're trained to look in the mirror and see their imperfections before anything else and be able to identify them and correct them while an outside authority is watching them do all of that. So everything is being performed. The noticing the flaw, the attempt to correct the flaw, the striving towards perfection is all being watched and performed all the time. And that goes deep into a psyche. And I would love to see some research being done that looks at that and see what the long-term effects and the impacts of that are to a dancer outside of the studio, off stage in their regular life. Robyn was teaching a workshop once, conducting a workshop, and I came for like the last bit of it, and I was just observing, and it was, I don't know what the split was between men and women, but there was this dynamic where several of the women in attendance or the non-binary people were saying the same thing, and there was one man who consistently was invalidating what they were saying.
In a room full of people that were saying, no, this is how we experience this reality, and he kept saying, no, I think that's not how it is.
And in the end, this one woman was like, we're telling you, listen to us. And like, that right there is the problem, that you can't even hear us when we're all saying this to you. So language, yes, is very important, but listening is more important.
I mean, I think that the Me Too movement has gone through different phases. I think at the beginning there was a heavy emphasis on call-out culture. And we also had conversations. We had a workshop in Berlin, and we had a whole discussion about this actually, like are there any values in something like call-out culture? I think that it does go through different evolutions of itself. I mean, it's such a pervasive problem that I feel like there is a really multitude of ways to come across addressing it. And I feel like, of course, as with every movement, like it has its own history and like different approaches and strategies are taken. But in terms of dance, I feel like there have been a lot of different situations, like I think in different countries, but it doesn't seem like there's a general consensus or collective thought internationally about what to do. Because there are some situations, of course, happening in New York, in Finland, in, in Belgium. I think it's really interesting that there are a lot of things happening in almost what looks like isolation, but there is a network to this. There is like a pattern of behavior. Mm-hmm. There is like a history of abuse, maybe even in certain companies, that maybe needs to be discussed in a more public way. And I think that's really what goes back to the heart of how Whistle got started, is all of these discussions that you have in private, one-on-one, in like little bits of isolation, they're not happening in isolation. These are pervasive structural problems that are happening internationally. It's across the whole dance industry. And so I feel like in the future, it would be great, I think, if there was maybe a more collective understanding of what do dancers need. Let's learn from the dancer, hear from them what they need, especially economically. What do you need for your body? What do you need economically? What do you need mentally? What do you need physically? All of this, and we should really learn from them.
What we have seen since we started there have been like peaks and valleys of momentum of people speaking out about the abuse that they've suffered. And so it's clear that it's this kind of Sisyphus thing where you're like pushing this boulder up the hill and then you like fall back a little bit and then suddenly there's like a momentum and you get it a little bit more. So that's definitely happening. People tend to speak out more when they feel like their voice will be heard and validated. And when you see that there's a lot of pushback, everybody gets quiet again. We've also seen that sometimes people will write to us with their stories or their experiences, and it's clear that it comes in this like moment of like the swirl of like courage of, oh, I've had it, I see that this is fucked up, and I'm gonna complain about it. So they'll write to us and they tell us what happened, and then we'll write back, and it's like, we hear you. This is what we can offer. What do you need from us? And then oftentimes there's this moment of like, nothing. We don't hear from them again. And it's clear that there's something that happens when you speak up, and it's like, if you're not met with full open arms, everyone's congratulating you and agreeing and validating you, you just go back into your hole and you're like suddenly like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And we see that that's been happening a lot, and that's something that I think we want to look at, is like, how can we support people so that they don't feel ashamed after speaking out?
I think there are different methods and strategies that we've discussed and that we've learned from different places. Like, for example, introducing something like an intimacy coach into the workplace, I think would be really exciting and interesting. I think for the dancers to have someone that can maybe mediate moments of discomfort, either with other colleagues or with a choreographer or with a director, and to have someone external in the space, just kind of there observing the situation, I think would be really helpful. I think there's also, of course, like you were saying, with like a third party system, like even a hotline for them to call would be really interesting if there's like something happening in their company. Of course, it gets a little bit more tricky when there's so much dance that's also freelance-based. And I think since there's so much gig-based work, that these are even more vulnerable, precarious situations for the dancer to be in. So there's really not always a structure of support for the projects that are basically what they're working on. So of course you can meet with just a choreographer and a few colleagues in a studio space in the middle of nowhere. And then if something happens, then we want to make sure that they have some kind of support that they can talk to, either like legal services, if they need some help with like a mediator, if they need an intimacy coach to come in. All of these things need to be not only available, but financially accessible. Like they can't be so expensive that the piece just says, oh, actually we don't have enough budget for that, therefore dancer safety is not a priority. Like, it needs to be economically accessible enough that it's possible to invite someone like that to even a very small project, and it would be a possibility.
I think that the solution lies in a long-term re-educating of everyone.
Yeah.
Because if a dancer is in a company or a group or a community where they feel like everyone is knowledgeable about certain dynamics and vulnerabilities and power dynamics, then they'll feel more compelled to speak freely. Mm-hmm. And also, one of the things that Whistle did early on, we're still interested in, is developing a speaking practice for dancers, because dancers are so deathly afraid of opening their mouths and saying anything, even like, hello, my name is Frances. They think that their body is enough, and actually they're trained that they shouldn't speak, and they shouldn't ask questions, and they shouldn't verbally oppose authority. That's part of the training. When someone writes to us with a story or a question or an issue, first of all, we ask them what they need from us. If they're in our vicinity, we'll try to meet with them if they're up for that. We try to start a dialogue with them to find out what it is that they need or they want. We try to give them as much power in deciding how we interact with them even, and what happens with the information that they have. That's the first thing.
Validation.
Mm-hmm. And then usually Robyn has compiled a huge resource list for different countries, different cities, of agencies, institutions, hotlines, other places where they can get information about their situation in particular. So we give them that information, and then we just try to keep talking with them and try to keep validating them and try to keep getting them to continue the conversation.
Workshops are usually a place for us to be able to get into contact with dancers, to hear from them, what do they need, what do they want, what are their thoughts about different topics. Usually the workshops have different themes, or we have different activities that we do in them. Some might be, for example, just about defining for the participants themselves, what is abuse, what is discrimination, what is sexual harassment in specifically the dance workspace, what are ways that you can ask for what you need. We've done one that was specifically about implicit bias, but I would say the majority of the workshops at this stage have definitely been just kind of introducing the topic to dancers and getting from them just a little bit of space just to create their own ideas. Because we're not really in the position, and we don't really want to be in the position to explain to someone how they should think about something like abuse or discrimination. Everyone comes to the situation with their own history and their own background. And so we're not trying to give people answers. We're trying to create a space for them to come to their own questions and answers. So it's usually just creating a time and a location for them to be able to discuss these types of discussions.
Our first aim, I think, was schools and universities and companies. No company is interested in having us come, I will say that first. And that's clear that they haven't yet accepted that this is an issue, and they haven't quite thought about how to remedy it or how to tackle the issue. And also, no one wants to financially prioritize it. What we see is that with dance companies and dance schools in particular, there's no priority there for, one, the time. They always have to rehearse something. It's like, oh, we have a last minute serenade rehearsal, this dancer fell down and we have to replace her, and that's more important than this, clearly. We'll reschedule. Oftentimes there's no rescheduling. So in a workshop at Tanzam August last year, 2018, we were invited to create with the participants a manifesto, which we called a manifestex. So within this workshop, we shortly examined the history of manifestos within dance practices and also art and people and society and culture. And then together with those participants, we did some exercises to then, in the end of the workshop, have this manifestex that we have published. on the website.
Yeah.
And I believe it's a list of I will statements.
Yeah.
And Robyn made a really great exercise to get to that point, which was, what are your desires? Mm-hmm. So we had everyone just really write down, I want what? I want blah. And that's how, and then after we had all this list of like, what do you want? What do you want? Just, it's all about desire, like pleasure. And then we just said, flip it and change it to I will. I will blank blank in order to get this thing that I want. And that's, maybe you should describe it.
That is a great description, actually. That was a really good.
That Manifestex was made with some really incredible people who came to that workshop.
Absolutely.
Brenda Dixon Gottschild came.
Amazing.
She is a writer and a professor, activist in Philadelphia, an incredible woman.
Absolutely.
Ilse Gekier from Belgium, from Engagement Arts came.
Yeah.
And she's been writing articles and doing research on this topic for years. And several members of the dance community in Berlin came. So it was really a powerful group of people that made that in that moment.
Absolutely. And I think one of the best things about a Manifestex that starts with I will is that it is important to remember that everyone has their own agency. Like, you are able to individually make changes on an interpersonal level in your own life. And so something like saying like, oh, I want this, future situation, but what am I willing to do it? So I will listen to other people. Like, I will accept someone else's, version of life, and I will respect it, and I will keep that as a nice thing. I feel like it's really important just to remember agency, and that everyone has the ability to impact other people. So we're not just kind of receiving impact from society, but we're also one of the people who has the possibility to impact society back.
I believe the last line of the manifesto says, I will bring a friend. So I think we're gonna bring a friend. Yes. Julia Eichten. Everyone, here she comes. My friends. So Julia is here in town, in Frankfurt, working with us right now, performing a dance called It's My House and I Live Here.
I think it first started actually with me engaging with Whistle inside of their open forums, being there for some that happened in the US, and seeing also in myself the lack of exposure to language surrounding dance and conversation and dialogues that happen in private that kind of felt they needed to be pulled out and shared in the community. So conversations was a big part of it, and through experiences that I had in my personal life, in my choreographic self, who I am as a dancer, who I am as a choreographer, and the agency or lack of that I dealt with surrounding those things. I won't get too specific about it at the moment, but the dance came through many different ways, through residencies of us having it be a duet actually, or us both directing. It was a lot of negotiating, figuring out how we both work and what also we both wanted, like what was the connective tissue between the two of us that we wanted to present. And I think we're still working it out. But a big thing that we all come back to, I think, that I'm discovering, is fighting for the autonomy through joy and pleasure. And because that is hopefully why we all continue to dance and continue to navigate through really difficult territories. I'm a big advocate of joy and people taking that into their body, even if you're not a dancer, but how do you engage with your body through space and the humanity of that? And I want to communicate that yes, shit is tough and hard and abusive and many, many layers of traumatic events or issues and things that we touch on, but how can we deal with them with sensitivity, softness, staying supple, and still sparkling through all of those things.
It's prismatic.
Yes.
It is
totally
prismatic.
prismatic.
It is prismatic.
I'll list a couple of the main overarching themes. One is this, the myth of the genius, the myth of the muse. And it's a recalibrating where does the inspiration come from and who is it for. So the performer, Julia, she is the muse, she is the genius. She doesn't need some other to work for or to
Approve of.
to let speak through her. That's one of the main concepts, and that's a broader project that Robyn and I are going to continue working on with dancers in the community in New York in the winter, winter 2020 at NYU, Center for Ballet and the Arts.
Memory inside the body, where things live, maybe traumatic things that are held, and also a releasing of those things in real time.
It's about choreographic memory, reappropriating choreographic memory, reliving the warm choreographic memories and the not so warm choreographic memories, and then doing something to those not so warm choreographic memories so that they can be reappropriated into something that builds resilience, so that the dancer can move on. And I say the dancer and I say the performer, but it's very much about Julia and her experience. And it's really important. It's not like not anybody could just do it. Like, couldn't be like, oh, second cast, which is another device of abuse that the dance world loves to use, second, third cast covers. There's a couple really great things that Robyn keeps reminding us about, and that is how to tell a story about something nasty and dark and scary about humanity in a way that is consumable. And also, Robyn is often reminding us about the joy and the resilience and the lightness of being a person and the spirit that lives inside. So,
I mean, there was a book, I actually am part of a really great queer book club, and one of the books earlier this year was Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, and I highly suggest reading their book. And I think it was a lot of the conversations that we had just kind of outside of even your residency that you had together to actually make the piece. A lot of it is just in general, like, how do you live in a society that is constantly, seemingly even more threatening? I think the acts against people of color, against women, against migrants are just kind of, it seems like it's growing, and the whole world gets more and more almost dangerous feeling. And how is it possible to acknowledge that all of that is happening, make positive changes, as well as still have a place of pleasure and joy? The heart of all of this as well is that it's just, I mean, if it is about dance, and if it is about, of course, how abuse comes into dance, then also what about the pleasure that's there as well? And so is it just always to say, like, these are all of the really horrific aspects and we need to do something about this? But I think it's really important to not forget the really pleasurable aspects.
An openness and a dialogue is something I really desire in the space of dance making process. Because even things that are quote unquote safe spaces, or now the use of, they're changing that word into brave space, I hear in certain places. But somehow we have to like coin a term to make the studio a safe place, which already makes it unsafe, I think. So an openness, a real dialogue happening in the community that is international and dealing with these things, and not just an institution saying, oh, I have 5 women on the program and 3 queer people and people of color, and so I've met my quota, and that means I'm doing something right. Like actually getting into the work and into the, I guess, psychology that surrounds all these things, and really kind of breaking those things apart and dealing with them as a community, I think is a big wish of mine.